Hello, folks. Today we are going to talk about the Enneagram Type 4, often called the Individualist, or as I like to call them, the custom car of ego consciousness. And all of this content comes from my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And you can check it out. Pre-orders are available on Amazon, and it comes on sale July 8th, 2025. So if you like this content, you'll find much more depth there. And if you don't know your Enneagram type, I recommend the IEQ9 Integrative Enneagram Test. And here's a QR code for that if you're interested. And then lastly, if you want to work with me, individual coaching, or you need a keynote speaker for an event, go to my website, douglynam.com, for more information. Okay, jumping into it. So the type 4, now they have a sacred wound of what I call internalized sadness. So what does that mean? It means that when they were a child, when you're born, you have this psychological umbilical cord that forms with your caregivers at birth and all through your infancy to allow your parents to essentially, or your caregivers, to do much of the driving of your ego in your early infancy. And that psychological umbilical cord has to be cut by one of 3 sharp negative emotions: anger, sadness, or fear. And if you're a type 4, you got the sadness much more than any other type. And you internalize it. You directed it at yourself, meaning it's kind of like you gave yourself this emotional wedgie, and you feel this sadness or grief, you could even call it shame, about how you perceive yourself. So it's kind of it's a necessary wound. I don't want to call it a flaw, but it's what shapes the chassis of your ego. If you think of your ego as a car, as the custom car, that's really what formed your protective barrier that gave your consciousness something to drive around in, and also protect you from the greatest threats in your childhood environment. So what that means is you probably weren't really validated for who you really were. You weren't mirrored accurately by your parents. They well-meaning, and I'm sure they loved you, and we all had to have the sacred wound, but yours came from a lack of appropriate mirroring from your parents, and so you felt a separation distress or anxiety and grief, or the sadness that you internalized, and not feeling recognized for who you really are. And that creates your greatest fear of not having a unique identity or having a place in the world. You don't know, you always feel like the oddball out in a crowd or a group, and like everyone knows what their meaning and place in the world, but you don't. And so this internalized sadness and this greatest fear then create your greatest vice, which is envy. It's a envy at seeing the beauty and the meaning and what's wonderful about everyone and everything else except for you. You can see how other people have a place in the world, other people belong, but you don't feel like you really fit in anywhere. And so this is all part of your shadow structure, which allows, again, your ego to grow and form, and you got to have it. But this is all in your unconscious mind, and your conscious mind doesn't want to look at this trauma because it's quite painful, and you can't confront it too soon because you need to be a little bit more developed psychologically. You need to move into sort of adulthood and then into midlife before you really have the coping skills to address some of these issues in a healthy manner. But it's good to work on them at any point in your life. But when you're young, it's a little early. But what happens is then that envy, your conscious mind doesn't want to look at this sort of envy that you have, and so it creates your primary ego addiction, which is melancholy. Now, this is weird. You would think, why would anyone want to be addicted to melancholy? Well, that melancholy is sort of a bittersweet sadness for the type 4s. It lets them sort of, in a weird way, it creates a kind of uniqueness because my pain and my suffering and my feeling different makes me stand apart, and it makes me different because my pain and suffering are so much more dramatic than anybody else's, which for the 4 can often be true because it's often said that 4s don't have feelings, they are their feelings. They tend to be on this wild roller coaster of highs and lows throughout their day and throughout their life. And it makes them intense. We also call them intense creatives sometimes. They have tremendous creative energy and this ability to see things that the rest of us can't. So it's both a superpower and a bit of a curse. And that's true for every single type because every strength comes with a weakness. And that's just how life works. So you have this weakness, but it's also kind of in an odd way, a strength at the same time. But these are maladaptive strategies that we want to learn to overcome through your whatever spiritual practice you have, whatever contemplative practice sings to your soul. But the problem is that melancholy, when you overdose on it, let me just say one more word about that. And this envy, it makes what fours have this need to stand apart and stand out. Because they feel different and they feel like an outsider, they tend to accentuate that outsider mentality, and they chafe at conventionality. They don't like to follow the crowd. They really don't. They both have a yearning to be validated and accepted, but also want to do it in their own way. And really, so it manifests in maybe how they dress. They want to look a little different from everybody else. They got to stand out with sometimes you say fours prove that you can't take it with you, but you can sure wear it out the door. And you'll often see them in sort of sartorial splendor of some sort, whether it's lots of tattoos or crazy hair or whatever it is. They'll want to look different from everybody else. And then, they'll have their vintage vinyl record collections and their craft coffee collections, whatever it is that gives them some sense of I'm special and different in the way that I live my life from everybody else. But that melancholy can sink them down. It can really drag them down into a really deep funk. And so when that melancholy stops being, it's maladaptive, but it also is helpful in some ways. But when you overdose on that and you sort of falling into this pit of real despair, you have a secondary or backup ego addiction. When all that melancholy, which is making you stand apart and look different and feel different, when it sort of drives your life into a ditch, and now it's created problems that melancholy can't solve, then you have an antidote, which is also maladaptive, but creates the opposite behavior patterns of your primary ego addiction. And for the fours, that's going to be flattery. Now, flattery is the primary ego addiction for a type 2. So when you adopt that flattery, you start to look more like a type 2 in some of their more unhealthy aspects. But what that means is you're going to reach out to other people and compliment them or praise them or look to be of help, rescue somebody, when really what the 4 is looking for, like the type 2, is someone to rescue them. They're looking for that special someone who will see them, validate them, get them, acknowledge them, really see their pain and see how special they are and validate their self-worth. But that flattery doesn't stand alone. It's still, because you're not becoming a type 2, because that flattery gets mixed with your greatest vice, which is still going to be envy. So envy plus flattery creates your ego stress response, which is then going to be codependence. So you kind of you tend to fall into these codependent relationships where what you really want is someone to rescue you and say wonderful things about you, but you can be a little intrusive or overly needy or relying on another person for your self-esteem, your self-worth, or really to pull you out of that melancholic funk. And it does work. So it's good you have this backup addiction, ego addiction, the secondary ego addiction, because that flattery and that codependence pulls you out of your melancholy and forces you to connect with another human being, which is ultimately a good thing in its own way, even though it's sort of a survival strategy and it isn't the healthiest thing you could be doing, but it's better than just falling down into a complete pit of utter despair. And that's its purpose. So it kind of relieves some of the stress on your ego until you can go back to your primary ego addiction again. And as always, we can flip back and forth between our primary and secondary ego addiction many times in a day and to varying degrees. So you might change your mind on these things really with lightning speed. It's unconscious. You don't even know you're doing it, but it's a survival strategy that you use to cope with your childhood environment. All right, now that leads us into the money monsters for the type 4, which are the flop and the flinger. So we've got two ways that we can have an unhealthy attachment to money. We can be avoidant of it, meaning we want to push it away, don't want to deal with it because of all the sadness and shame it triggers, or just because you want to be different, you want to defy convention and not deal with it. If this is what the world says is important, well, then it's not important to me. And that creates the flop, so why I call them the flop is you can almost hear them face planting on the pavement when they talk about their financial life. They chafe at any sort of conventionality like budgeting, bookkeeping, earning a living in some conventional way, following the rules of earning, saving, investing, and giving, which are the 4 pillars of finance. That's earning, saving, investing, and giving. So they might reject the entire economic capitalistic system and paint the whole thing with a broad brush. It's all evil. It's all bad. I don't want anything to do with it. Yada, yada, yada. Not saying there aren't real problems with our current economic system, but for the 4, it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction. If this is what everyone else says is important, this is what society says is important, then for me it's not. And therefore their financial life becomes a total flop. All right, then we have the anxious type, and the flop is probably a bit more common for 4s, I've seen. But when a 4 is anxious about money, and they really want a lot of it, and they care a lot about it, and they may make a lot of money, or they're going out there and trying to if they have a lot of resources for one reason or another, then they can become the flinger. And the flinger is someone who's going to take the money they have and fling it at forms of self-expression. And you can be bold. You have a sort of a jumbled style. You might be a flop in some respects and a flinger in others. So you might not make a lot of money, but when you do get it, the first thing it does is you sort of fling it out. And anything that makes you feel special and different, like the clothes you're wearing, the way you decorate your house, the kind of car you're driving, whatever it is or your artistic projects, your writing, your creative projects, you're going to fling it at forms of self-expression, and then you sort of miss the saving and investing part that's essential to have a robust and healthy financial life. So that's the flinger and the flop. So these are the core money monsters for a type 4. And I go into much more detail about each of these in my book, Taming Your Money Monster. So you can dive into that to get really specific about how this manifests. But what happens now if we're starting our journey in unconscious unity in the womb, and we're in the first half of life, the bottom part of the double cone Enneagram, this new model that I've developed to help explain how why the Enneagram works, which up to this point, most authors will tell you how it works, but are pretty lacking in explaining why it works. So we're grounding this in both neurobiology and childhood developmental psychology. And so all this shadow structure, all these things and all these ego addictions are really designed to help you establish your independence in life, allow you to differentiate from your caregivers, separate that egoic psychological umbilical cord that was necessary in your youth. But then your ego grows in the first half of life, and over time your ego gets so strong, it doesn't know when to stop growing. And it keeps growing until it pushes everyone and everything else away, in a sense. So you end up in what we call the dark night of the soul. You can even push away your connections to the sacred or the divine, whatever that means for you. So you really feel like you're lost and trapped in a great deal of pain. Oftentimes the midlife crisis is a hallmark of the dark night of the soul, but it can come at any point, and you can have many dark nights of the soul. And if you're a type 4, you probably feels like you're living there most of the time. But at any rate, the reason for this is to grow your ego so you have conscious separation. You can be consciously individuated and differentiated from the rest of reality, and we need that. But then what happens is that suffering, if we sit in that dark night and we try to move through it, not down and out of it, then it can crack open our ego. It really breaks us open and can bring us to a space of more love and compassion and acceptance for ourselves and others as we move into the second half of life or into the enlightenment structure, your path to real awakening. And that whole path is moving you now to interdependence. You've established your unique plate. No, not quite your unique identity. We're going to get there, but you've made it to adulthood, let's put it that way. You've got a job, a career, a family. You've got the things that are necessary to sort of function in the world. But now we need to move from conscious separation into conscious unity, which is the goal of all of us, to reach that enlightenment or pinnacle peak state, which it's hard to live there. I'm not there very often, but you get glimpses of it in moments of prayer and meditation, and you try to bring that back and integrate it into your daily life as much as possible. Well, how do you get there as a type 4? Well, the first thing we got to do is be mindful of your faux virtue. So as you're moving out of the dark night, or even really at any point in your journey, you have this sort of fake virtue that's good for other types, but might not be so helpful for you, and that's mindfulness. And now, I don't mean you shouldn't be doing meditation, which is good for you, or mindfulness practices. What it means is don't be so mindful about what everyone else is doing. Don't be so mindful of comparing yourself to other people and their achievements or their artistic expression or their all the things that everyone else is getting done in the world around you, which then triggers your envy, exacerbates your melancholy, and drives you deeper into your shadow structure if you're not careful. So it's not really about not doing meditation and mindfulness practices. It's about don't be so worried about what the rest of the world thinks, and don't be reactive to it. It's a kind of trap. The 4s are always reacting against convention, but that's as much of a trap as reacting in favor of convention. If someone like type 3s, myself, we tend to look at whatever the conventions or standards of the people or the society around us and try to meet those expectations. That's a trap for us to always be running on the hamster wheel of people pleasing. How do I meet those expectations? But the flip side for the 4 is it's just as much a trap to be reacting against them in a knee-jerk way without any discernment about whether it makes sense for you to do something one way or the other. You're sacrificing your freedom in a way especially when it comes to money, because a lot of the prudent financial practices are pretty boring, pretty conventional. They're the things you need to do to get a robust financial life. They're pretty well established, and if you're reacting against those things in an unhealthy way, your financial life is going to be a bit of a mess. All right, so if you can avoid your faux virtue of mindfulness, and you can start mindfully, mindfully is a good word here, but mindfully practicing your primary recovery virtue, or I should say consciously practicing it. So your shadow structure is all the unconscious defense mechanisms you have, and your enlightenment structure is your way out of that, right? And so to consciously work on joy, finding joy in your daily life is going to be the antidote to the melancholy that is your daily driver and is causing most of the self-created suffering in your life. So it's about finding joy in the little things, like the way the light comes through a window in the morning as you're drinking your coffee, or the way a cat curls up in your lap, or taking delight in your family members, your children, your spouse. Finding joy in those little things that will help make your soul sing in a positive way, rather than always sinking down into these melancholic funks, which then reinforce the more negative aspects of your ego. All right, so if you can start practicing joy, then you have a secondary recovery virtue, and that's going to be gratitude. Now, gratitude is the primary recovery virtue for type 1, so you start to look and act a bit more like a healthy type 1, where you're more stable and equipoised in ways. But so gratitude, I would say a gratitude journal is so helpful for everybody. I've been doing this now for a while, and boy, what a difference it makes to be able to sit down and in the beginning of my day or the end of my day to really list the things that I'm grateful for in my life. But for a type 4, having that gratitude for the blessings in your life, when you combine that with joy, will lead you to your highest virtue, which is then going to be equanimity. So joy plus gratitude equals equanimity, and that's the cure for the envy, which is your greatest vice. And that's what's going to really help heal your sacred wound and help you live the healthiest and happiest expression of your Enneagram type. And it's often said that, who said it? Richard Rohr, is that if we don't transform our pain, we're destined to transmit it. And so if you don't take on this spiritual journey of entering your enlightenment structure, you're basically walking through much of your life, as I have done most of my life, and you're acting out your childhood trauma, and you end up causing suffering for yourself first and foremost, but also for those you love. So it's really how much are you willing to care about the people around you to work on these issues so you aren't transmitting your pain to the people that are most important in your life. And when you get to that greatest virtue, equanimity, part of it is about seeing yourself as a fractal piece of the divine, is seeing that sacred spark of beauty inside yourself and seeing your unique place in the world as a manifestation of the divine. And when you do that, when you can find that inner center and get that equanimity where you're still going to have highs and lows of your emotions, but there's a part of your brain, part of your consciousness that can kind of step back a little bit and even not disassociate in a healthy way, but pull back and not be identified with your feelings so much. So your feelings can come and go, but you don't need to latch onto them and let them take you on that roller coaster ride that you tend to be on a daily basis, and find that equanimity, that smooth balance or equipoise to your life that's filled with gratitude and joy for things as they are. And when you do that, that fulfills your greatest hope. That's when you can find your total uniqueness. You understand and can experience. It's not just a knowing, it's an experiential kind of education, if you will, of seeing yourself as a piece of this grand cosmic puzzle and seeing the divine glory inside of yourself. And when you do that, again, it's going to help you find that emotional equanimity and balance. But most importantly, what it will do is allow you to tap into your sacred gift, which is divine glory. Like now, when you're living at your highest self in the second half of life, then what happens is you see the divine glory inside of you, and you also see the divine glory in other people and other things, and bring that glory, that creative expression to the world through whatever your artistic or creative or professional medium happens to be, or just through how you interact with other people, that you really are this is sort of your cosmic community service to the world. It's the game piece on the puzzle of life that only a four can bring, which is really just that, oh my God, how this sacred beauty, the truth, the glory of all existence that resonates within, around, and amongst everyone and everything in love. And when you can really bring that forward, then you can be more of the money master. When you still got to work on the 4 pillars of finance: earning, saving, investing, and giving. But those paths to money mastery are much easier when you're not projecting all of your trauma onto your money life, and you then have that equipoise within those 4 areas of your financial life. And you become what I call the flame. Is that you bring that flame. It's like when you're in your shadow structure, you're more like a candle that gets blown by the wind, or you explode in these great bursts of creative energy, then die back down. But the flame is steady. It's constant. It burns bright without burning out. And that's really the gift you bring. You literally light up the whole world around you with your whatever that creative juice is, whatever that creative expression for you really is, and then you become, the flame. So that's a quick overview of the ego map for type 4. And again, you want more information, check out my book, Taming Your Money Monster. And if you like these videos, please remember to like, share, subscribe, or again, go to douglynham.com for more resources or for individual coaching sessions. Thanks, gang. Take care.